All right, today we're going to tackle one of history's darkest chapters, but from a totally different angle. We're talking about the money. This is an investigation into the real price of fascism.
So let's just get right to the heart of it. We've all been taught to think of fascism as this, grassroots populist thing, right? A movement of the masses. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the real engine wasn't in the streets, but in the boardrooms? What if it was less of a political revolution and more like a corporate takeover?
And look, this isn't just some wild theory we're throwing out there. This is a direct quote from an affidavit by a key player, a banker named Kurt von Schroeder, given after the war. He came right out and said it. The business world wanted a strong leader who could provide stability. So they weren't just sitting on the sidelines. They had a very clear agenda. Now, to really get a grip on this, we've got to go back in time, way back, because it turns out the playbook for this kind of corporate state mashup, it wasn't new at all. In fact, it had a medieval precedent. Okay, say hello to the Hanseatic League. Now, I want you to think of this less like a country and more like a massive, powerful corporation that basically acted like one. It was this trading bloc of German cities that had its own laws, it made loans to kings just to get influence, and get this, when that didn't work, it had its own military to crush the competition and protect its monopoly. Does any of that sound familiar?
All right, let's fast forward to the 20th century. This is the main course, folks. We're going to name names. We're going to look at the specific people and the powerful groups who put their money behind the rise of the Nazi Party.
First things first, let's just blow up a major myth right now. Hitler didn't just pop up out of thin air as some charismatic leader. His entire political career started with a paycheck from German military intelligence. Yeah, he began as a field agent right at the bottom of this military command structure.
And he had a very clear mission. His job was to infiltrate and report on all these different political parties that were sprouting up in post-war Munich. And according to his own boss, a Major Karl Mayer, Hitler was specifically ordered to join this tiny little group called the German Workers' Party and build it up. This wasn't a choice. It wasn't an accident. It was an assignment.
Okay, so you've got the military planting the seed, right? But for that seed to grow into what it became, it needed water. And in this case, the water was money. Serious money. And that's where the Harzburg Front comes in. This was a powerful coalition that formed in 1931 with one single explicit goal: to bring down the democratic Weimar Republic. And you have to see who was involved here. This was not some fringe group of radicals. We are talking about the former head of Germany's central bank, the biggest steel magnate in the country, a millionaire media mogul, and the former head of the entire German military. This was the establishment. Their support didn't just stay in backroom meetings either. It went into direct action. In November of 1932, they sent what's known as the Industriellen-Eingabe, the Industrial Petition. I mean, this was basically a formal letter from Germany's absolute economic elite, directly lobbying President Hindenburg and telling him, make Hitler the chancellor. And just look at the names on this thing. You got Kurt von Schroeder, that private banker we heard from at the beginning. You have executives from major banks, huge oil companies, giant steel works. All in all, 19 of Germany's most powerful economic figures put their names right on the line, demanding that Hitler be put in power. But here's where the story takes a really startling turn. This wasn't just a German phenomenon. What's truly wild is that a parallel plot was unfolding thousands of miles away, across the Atlantic, on Wall Street. And they were using a remarkably similar playbook. I mean, the parallels are just uncanny. In Germany, the goal was to crush unions and install an autocrat. In the US, you had these powerful interests tied to JP Morgan and the DuPont family who wanted to kill Roosevelt's New Deal and, according to a congressional investigation, maybe even overthrow the government. The methods? Exactly the same. Fund radical right-wing front groups to do the dirty work for you. And hey, don't just take it from me. This is a direct warning from the U.S. ambassador to Germany, at the time William Dodd, in a 1936 letter to President Roosevelt. He was seeing it with his own eyes. He warned that some of our American ruling families were working hand in glove with the Nazi regime and trying to bring a similar system back home to America. So what happened when the war was lost? You might think that's the end of the story, but no. Even as the Third Reich was literally crumbling, its financial backers already had a plan B. For them, the end of the war was never going to be the end of the project. And this plan was for something they called the Fourth Reich. But I want you to erase any images of tanks and armies from your mind. This wasn't about a military empire. This was envisioned as a clandestine, financial, and industrial empire, a shadow state that could operate all over the world using corporate structures instead of military ones. And how do we know this? Because of declassified intelligence documents. This MI5 report from after the war lays out the explicit Nazi plan to go underground and, in their words, reappear in a suitable disguise to keep their work going. So the key takeaway here is that military defeat was seen as just a temporary setback. And the strategy was incredibly detailed. I mean, they plan to use front companies to hide Nazi assets, to stir up civil unrest, to make things as hard as possible for the Allies, and to use the fear of communism to get big business back on their side. They even had a plan to leverage support from their allies abroad, like the Hearst Press over in the United States. And the nerve center for this whole planned financial empire? Where was it going to be? Hamburg. The very same Hanseatic city with those powerful banking families that had been on it from the very beginning. It was all coming full circle. So, what's the final bill here? What's the real legacy of this corporate fascist alliance? Well, when you look at this timeline, you can see a crystal clear pattern of investment. It kicks off with the Herzberg Front in 31, which leads to Hitler becoming chancellor, and it's all happening in parallel with that Wall Street plot. By 44, they're already planning a financial Fourth Reich. And then, the ultimate irony? Post-war German industry gets rebuilt by the Marshall Plan, a plan written by an executive from the very same anti-Roosevelt group, the American Liberty League. You can't make this stuff up. And that brings us to our final and, frankly, pretty unsettling question. This whole story shows that fascism wasn't just an ideology. For some, it was a business model. It was an investment by a powerful few to protect their interests against democracy. So the question we have to leave you with is this. If that's what it was then, what are the warning signs of a similar investment today?